Great, everybody. Well, thanks very much for joining us. I'm here today with Stephanie Stahl from the CMI. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Today, really, we're going to sort of spend a bit of time walking through the research, take a few insights from that, and then walk through maybe some clear examples, both B2C and B2B, to give a bit of balance of how maybe you guys listening can actually, take some hints and tips from your content marketing approach. I think one of the big things when everybody was filling in the forms of the through our own content marketing, a lot of people listening today are really interested in how they can optimize. So everybody's put their foot in the water, but they're looking to really how they can get greater value and greater level of performance out of their content marketing. So we're going to obviously try and focus on that as much as we can today. In terms of timescales, we're going to run on for about an hour again. We'll share the slides and everything afterwards. But what we're really hoping for is to, just to give a little bit of informal commentary around the report, focus on a couple of elements of that, and then really talk through a structure of perhaps how you can take some of these and implement them into your day-to-day content marketing approach. So in terms of where we go from here, I think the key thing from our point of view is trying to help a lot of people avoid some of the key pitfalls. And these pitfalls keep on flying up time and time again as we engage with clients. But really, there's a lot of challenge around, within B2B is around the ability to differentiate their marketing activity and really make sure that they can, create content that's going to really resonate with the target audience. And that is something that comes, especially in the research, highlights where a lot of people are still struggling. That and consistency, the ability to deliver, on a schedule, on a regular basis, because again, a lot of people who are really thinking campaigns over an always-on approach. So some of the takeaways we're going to talk through is how you can perhaps avoid being one of the content marketing usual suspects. So today, what we're going to do is go through the report, touch on what we think content marketing actually means, and really what commitment to that actually is. So it's really important that people understand that it's a great terminology, but defining it and making sure then you build on it is absolutely critical for success. And again, it is a very strong methodology and practice, but really it takes a lot of effort and strategy to make sure that you get the best level of performance from it. So we're going to go through the report, some 5 key commitment takeaways, and some Q&A at the end. So if we just delve straight, first of all, into the report, again, there's lots of data that we can share, but really, maybe if we give you a little bit of context to the report, first of all, for those who aren't familiar with it, and Stephanie, if you can just sort of lead that for me, just give a little bit of context to what the background of the survey and the report.
Yeah, for sure. So, this data comes from our annual survey, and we put this survey out to quite a large audience. And what we're looking at today is the UK cut of it so that we can talk specifically about what's going on in the region. But we're looking at content marketing trends. We're looking at benchmarks. We get really excited every year to share the results, and it's kind of fun to see the changes year over year. And it's a great way for marketers to not only benchmark themselves and their brands, but also to validate some of their strategies or to validate some of the challenges that they're having. And we feel excited by the fact that there is growth. There's really nice growth, pretty significant growth in content marketing. And we know it's a more mainstream concept now. It's no longer the shiny new object, and it's no longer should we, but how do we do it even better? And as you and I have chatted about, Alistair, sometimes content marketing becomes this catch-all for everything from native advertising to branded content. But for our purposes today, we'd like to be clear that, we feel content marketing is a strategic way to build an audience, not unlike a media brand. And so, the slide you've got up here, kind of shows the overall context of how the most committed content marketers are faring and what they care about, to the ones who, as you said, are just starting to dip their toe in the water. So it's not surprising that the most committed are also the most successful. And we can talk about some of those points as we go.
Great. No, I appreciate that. And I think, like you said, there's a lot of more people engaging the practice. There's certainly some organisations and that are very sophisticated, but they are probably less so and few and far between. And really, the driver for many people, especially when we were asking people when they were filling in the form for the webinar, they are just getting started, and what they're looking to do is now optimize and improve to get that sort of level of performance and expectation they have for the time and effort they put in. So it's almost rate of return. And I suppose some of the key things from the survey came up on there, which I think we talked about earlier yesterday, which was about the creativity and craft in content marketing. So the most committed are actually seeing this as almost an art form itself, and how they as an organisation are really have the foundations in place, they have the process, they have the system. Now it's about how they're actually putting the icing on the top. And really what we see is many organisations that can actually focus on that value of the creativity, especially with the noise that's going on, are really one of the biggest levers to be successful in this time.
Yeah, it's actually one of my favorite pieces of the research. It really warms my heart, the value that's being seen from the creativity and craft. And we've seen that across the board in our research, and the higher quality and more efficient the content creation, the better the creativity, the better the success. And, I know there are plenty of people out there who could argue or do argue that, you can do okay content as long as you have a great promotion and distribution strategy. I couldn't disagree more. It will always come back to bite you. So this particular statistic I find to be wonderful. So keep it up.
Exactly, but I think that comes with a lot of bravery. It comes a lot of experimentation and style, let's call it. To be able to deliver consistency and I suppose different messages and different stories is obviously the holy grail. Telling a unique story is what everybody's looking for, but obviously that takes time and effort. And if you look at some of the challenge many marketers have, is actually releasing that time and effort, which was one of the big things from the survey that I took away. If we look at one of the key points around documented content strategy, I always get asked, and I ask people, have you documented it? And everybody then rolls out the cupboard, rustles around for a moment, and lays out their marketing plan. And when we look at it, we see that, it's great that you've got a marketing plan, but it isn't a content marketing plan. It isn't really a way that you're actually going to formulate and win a strategy. It's just generally a promotional plan. So I think one of the key things to get to that holy grail of creativity and craft, there needs to be strong identification around the strategy and perhaps the practice, the method of actually delivering that content to make sure that it is a practice that not only the individual in the organisation who's presenting the plan, but the wider organisation is bought into. And we see the most committed having very clear articulation internally and externally of what their content strategy is, and they're able to clearly highlight where they can use to optimize it and be more organic with how they run that strategy. So where we see within the report, if they're not being the experts at content marketing, but the ones who are actually getting good success and have committed are the ones actually having a strong strategy and documentation in place to support it, which again I've got to clearly highlight isn't a marketing plan.
Yeah, we feel so strongly about this. We devote entire workshops to it, and articles and consulting. And, it's something that I guess in a lot of ways we try to beat people over the head with. It's so critical, and we know it because we see it show up when we look at the most successful companies. Not only have they laid out this content marketing strategy, they have documented it, they have reviewed it, revised it, perfected it. And I realize too, a lot of companies struggle with this. We hear, they've got small teams, so they don't really have the time to do that. Maybe they don't have the resources. They're not really sure it's necessary. All valid reasons, of course. But I hope what people will take away from this research and any follow-up articles that they may want to check into from either of us, that it really, truly matters. So start thinking about it, write something down. Don't just verbalize it, actually document it, share it widely. And, we like to say revise it or at least review it on an annual basis because things change.
And I think that's one of the key things when you're looking at this type of thing. If you take one example of, documenting a content strategy, you're looking at target audience, for example, and I always talk about buyer personas, and everybody's got a buyer persona. But really, the audience changes, and the audience does actually move with the times. So the market dynamics or whatever is actually creating that change to the buyer persona has to be noted and has to be reviewed, because that's going to reflect in your content strategy. It's good old targeting, as it would be. But there's so many people I speak to who are in a position where they've got this buyer persona that they did in, 2000, and they're still rolling it out as a way of we're still marketing to this individual, and this is the reasons why. And I think targeting is one of the biggest areas, when you're documenting your strategy, is ensuring that not only the production, the style, the tone of voice is all has to be covered in that strategy, but it's really about making sure you're focusing on the right loyal audience, as it would be.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we like to say, determine who specifically you are creating content for. What are their needs? Not your needs, but their needs. The thing is that the mistake, as you were alluding to, the mistake we often see is that sometimes companies, they try to target a super wide universe, be all things to all people. But what happens then is they become almost invisible to the core audience. So getting that set and determined and documented upfront and then reviewed regularly is so critical.
So yeah, I mean, one of the key things, and you're looking at the report, if you look at the UK market and where we're looking towards the most committed, there's a lot of things that can be taken away. And I think one of the biggest areas of opportunity, not just for the UK audience, but its ability to produce this content creation and have a very excellent flow of output. And that one of the things which, if we go into perhaps some of the slides going through the presentation, one of the biggest challenges are how content marketing is, or where it's still owned. And I think if we start to look at, perhaps some of the more intricate elements of the research, you can see that if we're looking at how from an organisational structure that is still owned predominantly by one person who's within the marketing team, or it is the marketing team, and it's still not broadly spread across the organisation. I feel when you're starting to look at production of output, the challenges of getting things signed off, getting quality over quantity, or trying to do both, is verging on impossible if you're still having that challenge of being owned by one individual. And so where we see some of the best organisations to address this is they build a network and a community around them, which is a network being some further internal stakeholders, maybe the executive, maybe some product owners, maybe some thought leaders in the company, but also branching out of that, not just to look within the organisation, but externally to customers who are open to driving either acts of advocacy or content collaboration or influencers in the market. And we know influence in marketing has been a topic over the last few years, but where we still see many organisations having this very linear approach to content marketing, where it's still owned by that individual. It is moving, and there are broad strokes to open that up to a wider organisation, but still, even in the larger organisations, because of the requests coming in and the lack of structure, it still is only owned by a small percentage of the people in the organisation.
A lot of brands are still trying to figure this out, for sure, to get just the right structure. And I think the results, are pretty much the same across the board, not just in the UK when we look at these small teams or one-person teams. And quite honestly, there are pros and cons to a centralized team and a decentralized team, because, at the end of the day, one size doesn't fit all. And, I think some people would say, gosh, it seems so luxurious to have a specific team per product or per brand. Sounds great, right? But I've also seen organizations struggle with redundancies or lack of a brand voice, and generally lack of communication and collaboration. So there's no one perfect model, but I know for the teams that have very small sets of resources, or even one, do struggle quite a bit.
But that's where I think opening it up to finding and identifying that network, and when you've got the people bought into the process, it's about really making sure the process is easy to extract that support and that value from you, the organisation, from your customers, from your influencers. And that's probably one of the biggest opportunities I think presents to many organisations. Because if you've got the foundations in place, you've got the process, and you can express value to people involved, it's very easy to take people through that journey. But again, I still think that's an area where many organisations are frightened. A, to build a network. B, they don't know how to. And C, that network is something that, over time is a bit of investment, but it pays back tenfold.
And, it also becomes kind of a factor in governance as well, because once you have that network, you need to figure out the proper governance strategy with your content, and that's probably a whole other webinar conversation, but it is a factor.
Yeah, agreed. So when you're looking at the maturity of the UK market, I mean, as we know, there's a lot of people becoming more and more sophisticated, but again, it is still sort of making sure that the foundation's in place, and then they're starting to move the needle. And I think from our perspective, the UK market is still behind the US, but it's still where many organisations are starting to see this as a strategic lever, and that's great to see, especially from a budgetary point of view. I think the stats were about 30% of the marketing budget is being allocated to help people drive the investment, to drive the level of competency up in the organisations themselves. But if we look at, perhaps in the research, some of the key attributes to organisations increasing their success in content marketing, we can see that from the research, lo and behold, or not surprising, you've got content creation, high quality, more efficient. But I would ask the question to you, Stephanie, maybe, what is defined as high quality content from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when I'm speaking with brands about the quality issue, I often will, talk about models that other brands have done, where more and more they're hiring skilled writers and editors and researchers and designers, and not just assuming that their internal marketing team can suddenly assume the role of a fantastic long form story writer. So I think we sometimes say, kind of think like a journalist. We count on journalists to do their research, to get their facts correctly, to report, to gather information and data, and then ultimately to turn it into a compelling story. And that's where I kind of put the quality badge on. It has to have all those factors we think of a media property or a newspaper. Now, granted, I know we all have our opinions about various newspapers and other media brands, but at the end of the day, there's quality that comes from paying attention to those things, and of course adding that layer of creativity that allows you to sort of rise above all the noise that's out there.
Definitely. And I think you raised a very good point. Again, got to have the process, got to be able to produce this content, but you've got to look at the skills that you bring into the table. And I think the editorial, the writers, the story writers, the videographer, the ability to actually craft this content, does take a big skills mix. And I think, that combined with the internal team of maybe the customer in our respects, where you've got internal thought leaders who have fantastic insight, fantastic knowledge, but how do you extract that in a meaningful way? And how do you do that consistently? And how do you do that creatively? And again, it comes back down to the process of how you engage the organisation to get to that high level of quality. And I'm going to talk perhaps a little bit how we work with customer advocacy programs to help drive that quality bar up, which we'll touch on later on in the presentation. Yeah, as we mentioned before, the strategy, getting that place, getting that document is obviously key. And I think one of the big areas for me where it's solely missed when people budgeting for content marketing, a lot of the content marketers, especially in B2B, they produce a lot of high quality content, but then they fail to get that enough eyeballs on it. I think there's only about 20% of content that actually gets seen by your target audience, or less than that. So really, you've got to work very hard, if not harder, to get that seen by the right target audience, never mind producing it in the first place.
Content needs to be truly brilliant and excellent to get those eyeballs.
Yeah, it does. And we always joke in the office around, when either a blog or a video or the views go through the roof, you've got it right, and the data is everything. but then you've got to learn from that and dissect it. And this is where, if you're looking at, the success factors really come into play. It's about, okay, well, what was the message in that video? What was the pain point that you were addressing? What was the story? What was the narrative? And making sure once you've documented that, you can then refer back to it, because you can see then a trend in the data to say everybody who's shown an interest in, I don't know, for this brand building, the brand building content stream is performing better than the lead generation content performing stream. So it's getting the insight of why was it successful, and the only way you can do that is making sure you analyze it, but also you then document it for future reference to then start driving continued action from it. A lot of good things in the report that have come out, and I think from our point of view, it's just reinforcing the fact that yes, people are doing it. They still don't necessarily have the foundations in place, but everybody is on that journey to add that little bit more effort and try and refine. And I think the areas of refinement have definitely got to come from being able to differentiate in the market, cutting through the noise, and they do that by producing high quality content. Getting high quality content means you need a process to deliver that and make sure you do it consistently, and then you need the right team and mix of skills around you to ensure that you are successful. And I'll say, those key ingredients haven't changed for the last few years of running the report. We know that's the case, but it's nice to see that the step change year on year is coming through. So, I mean, the way we try, and again, we do a lot of audits of clients' performance and their content strategy to see initially where they are currently, so how we can put recommendations in. And I think one of the key areas, what we start to look for as part of the analysis or that audit, is more of a current state analysis to see how are they actually getting on, and what sort of tactics are they driving, what sort of characteristics are they demonstrating at the moment. And I would say, for many people who are listening today, a lot of people on the left-hand side really I have a toe in the water approach, and I don't know whether this resonates with a lot of people, but where they have limited focus on subscribers. So these are people at the very, very top of the funnel. They're the target audience, but again, they're not necessarily people who are actively engaged in a lead or pipeline engagement. And this is where many short-sighted technology companies we may work with focus on too much on the heavy metrics of pipeline, leads and ROI, rather than focusing on the real top of the funnel and getting those subscribers and doing everything they possibly can to keep them, grow them and make them loyal. So that combined with limited documentation, very campaign driven, lack of budget, some basic personas, and focus on, I suppose, trying to produce the content rather than trying to finesse the content, and where it's owned by one or two individuals would be, I would say, somebody who's just getting their toe in the water. Whereas if you look on the best in class, these are people who have, a really high level of subscriber base. They have a lot of loyal subscribers that keep on coming back. The organisation's doing everything to nurture those subscribers in the right way. They have very clear definition of success, and I think from the report, that's still something that's floating around. Many don't even capture ROI, which is obviously one metric to justify the program for a longevity, but also there's areas where many organisations tend not to even start to measure the performance or know what success looks like. So I think when you're defining the strategy, and we'll talk through this later, is about how you actually set the right metrics in place to define what you can communicate as success to the business.
I think that's an important point, this whole idea of what success is. And, of course, it's going to be different for everybody. Is success a bigger audience? Is it more leads? Is it revenue? Perhaps for some, it's a lower cost to acquire a customer, which is great use of content, right? So I think that's one of those important things when we're talking about documenting the strategy. It's one of the questions that needs to be asked. At the end of the day, how will we call this a success? What do we need to see? What do we need to measure to consider this a successful effort?
I agree, and I can give you an example where I speak to one customer. They're producing content, and this content's trying to do too many things. It's trying to do lead generation, it's trying to build an audience, it's trying to attract one persona, and it's also trying to attract another persona. It's so fragmented, and the challenge that they have is that they don't have a purpose around the content they're producing, and that's a purpose down to the individual piece. This piece is for this audience, for that purpose, for that return, or for that action. And really, you need to think very at a top level, but also have to think at a very granular level to make sure that your investments are driving the return that you're looking for, or at least achieving the objectives that you're setting for yourself. And a lot of that comes from investment in time, targeting audience, very intelligent personas, and getting really in-depth knowledge around who the audience you're attracting and why. And I think the why question always crops up is, making sure that you're taking people on a journey, but they know why you're taking them through that, and you're giving them the tools to be successful. But, as we talked about, big organisation buy-in, getting everybody clear, multi-channel promotion if required for a lot of content. But really, it's about pulling that audience in and then trying to personalise it. And I think, when we talk to a lot of, especially B2B companies, the challenge around personalisation and segmentation always comes into, everybody wants to have that one-to-one conversation, but when they've got a large enterprise where they're trying to target many audiences, it's very, very difficult. So how can they build a content strategy that can service that? And best-in-class firms are very much focused on using automation to do a lot of the legwork to drive that personalisation and taking a lot of the backbone and breaking out of the program. So really what we're looking for, and what we'd recommend, commitment means focusing on some key characteristics. It means focusing on the goals that are defined for yourselves. But really, if we were going to drill a little bit deeper from the research, again, we wanted to understand and provide some takeaways of how maybe you can go about focusing on some perhaps top 5 key things or key commitments that you would look at. So really what we want to do is focus on potentially what 5 commitments could be, and we're not saying these are the only ones, but these are certainly things that really do make a big difference if you get them right. The first commitment really is focusing on loyal audience. And this is audience over anything else. This isn't just people in your database. This is actually everybody that's touching or engaging with your brand, customers, prospects, influencers. And really the route to revenue is to focus on audience before you monetize it. And this is, again, I suppose we were talking about the CMI journey that Joe went on about building and how long it took him to build an audience. I don't know whether you want to talk to that.
Yeah. I mean, and it kind of gets to one of our other commitments that we'll talk to in a bit about sort of being patient. But the CMI brand, when it was started, I think it was about 3 years that the blog, which started with a blog, that was the first form of content that came out from CMI. It took about 3 years before the brand really started to monetize. So it took a long time to build the audience, to create loyalty within that audience. And then once it got to sort of that magic number, and I don't really mean an actual number, but meaning, we've built this audience. They like what we do. We're giving them great content. We're helping them solve business problems with this content, that the brand could continue to grow in ways that it could monetize itself. So there's a big patience factor there. And with loyalty, Susan Bidell from Forrester said something at Content Marketing World not long ago that I thought was kind of the perfect expression. She's like, customer obsession is your only competitive advantage. So you got to get them, you've got to nurture them, you've got to keep them happy, and they will return the favors. They will. I always advise people to think, what attracts them from a personal standpoint in your day-to-day life? What do you see out there that you think is great, that's personal, that's and one for me, I'll just throw out a quick example. I've got a daughter in college, and I've got a daughter who's a junior in high school, who's all about the college prep right now. And for the last 5 years, I've been inundated with emails and social ads and even direct mail from test prep companies and college planning companies. And only one stands out above all of the others that I get. And because they've provided me with valuable information that helps demystify and uncomplicate this whole world of college here in the US. And while I have never once paid for their services or used their services, all my kids haven't, I have recommended them to so many other people. So while I'm not a customer or a purchaser, I'm an influencer because I think the content quality is so excellent. They're not selling to me, they're just helping me. And they're targeting what keeps me up at night. So I do them a favor by recommending them to other people who will pay.
No, exactly. And I think, if we told that story to a B2B marketer who's just, been going for a while and he's getting challenged or she's getting challenged on ROI, it's very difficult to say, don't worry, you wait, a couple of years and we'll start showing you a return. And I think, when you're looking at the different drivers for businesses, it comes back down to setting the right expectations. But the goals shouldn't still be the same. Whether you're trying to build a database of people that you want to market to, and then ultimately start to cross-sell or upsell into that, it's so important that you do focus on the goal of looking at your customers, looking at your target audience, what do they really want, and make sure the targeting is there. And I speak to a lot of people who've got and started embarking on content marketing. They do a great job, they're producing lots of content, they're doing a fantastic job at producing numbers. But when you start to drill deep into who are they attracting and what is this audience doing, they find time and time again that the audience isn't the right type of audience. So they're producing a lot of content that's not bringing in specifically the audience they're looking for. It's bringing in, a lot of people, it's bringing in a lot of subscribers, but they're not the key people. They're either, a lot of the time, it's too low level. So people are bringing in, a junior rather than a sponsor. Which again we know is more inherently difficult to get, but the reality is it's just tweaking and focusing on what actually does that audience look like for us. And B2C, it's quite a broad audience. B2B, it's a very focused audience. And with the B2B marketing, it's very much around honing in on a smaller audience, but driving that level of loyalty. And then, like you said, being able to start to reap the value. And that really comes from driving and offering potentially more exclusive to the community, nicer offers that potentially could help them improve their day-to-day being. But the essential ingredients are focusing on that audience and then looking to monetize it. But it's patience, which really brings us to the second commitment, is about how you train for it and setting expectations. I think many content marketers, or any marketers really, struggle with the expectation setting and really convincing many people who, because digital content marketing is all very new, it's not been going around for tens of years, there's still a lot of uneducation in the market. So the ability to be able to push back or be able to set expectations is absolutely critical for success. So if you look at, when you are engaging with people internally, or when you are starting to look at it, most people should really start to look at the journey that they might go on. And this isn't a journey of, building audience doesn't happen overnight. It takes years to build an audience. We talked to the content marketing example of 3 years, but certainly it can be done quicker if it's positioned the right way and you focus on the right niche or the right strategy or the right channel. So it's so important that if you're looking at, the diagram here where many people embark on their content marketing journey and they start to fail to communicate and achieve their intended goals, we would say perhaps the goals weren't set correctly in the first place, and really helping you the need to really educate the wider business on what does success really look like. And that varies by business. But the fact is you need to be able to hit these key goals, and we would say building audience and subscribers, which would be one of the first things, having quality content and production, being the second, but third, you then need to start showing some form of return. But the way you can probably do that more effectively is moving from your traditional model to a new model. And the old model is probably how you were doing your marketing activity, which means you don't stop that, but it's really how you transition this new model in with sensible gains. And to do that, you really need to make sure that your content marketing strategy is sets out, which is completely different to how you communicated a plan before, but really how it can complement the old model with a view of moving everybody into this new model, which allows you to get the buy-in and the budget. But really, if you keep a steady course on producing and increasing the loyal subscribers, you're gonna have a lot more success. And really, the business over time is going to use this as a vehicle to be successful. But this, if you're looking at the examples we can talk through, specifically the one that I'll refer to, which was a company called Energy. Energy were basically a brand that did no content marketing before. They manufacture combined heat and power units, But these organisations really wanted to start to target a very focused audience, which is really looking at the engineer, the facility manager, but anybody who would be speccing and identifying, combined heat and power units. Now, this isn't the most sexy industry, but really it's really where this organisation embarked on a journey which they set out with a view of engaging their audience first of all and then monetising that over time. Energy finally got bought out by Centrica about 12 months ago, and really through that journey, one of the reasons why Centrica bought Energy was the fact that they had such a wide, broad audience that they've already had it opted into. So the value of those subscribers, the value of that audience can now be monetised even further, not just by selling the combined heat and power units, but the fact that that audience really can be cross-sold or upsold into. And now Centrica have a strategy to sell their wider portfolio, but one of the main reasons has been the value that can be gained from this content and building that audience, because that audience has value. So it's important how you express that value to the key stakeholders and show, over time how it can be monetized.
That's such a great example. I mean, we, as I said before, it's like sort of patience, right? We just, try to guide people, brands that, it can take months, it can take more than a year. You have to sort of manage expectations within the company. But once you do have that audience and the loyalty, it pays dividends. So got to stay the course.
Stay the course. So how do you stay the course is the question a lot of people say. And so if you look at the research, one of the biggest things is about the strategy and communicating that strategy. And where, if we look at one of the main commitments is about designing the right strategy, documenting it, and then optimizing it to make sure you have really a strong supply chain. And from our point of view, especially when we're starting to lay out a strategy, we really ask, what is the purpose that you're trying to achieve? Now, many people try and put in all their core objectives and say, well, we want to do, thought leadership, we want to do lead generation, we want to enable the sales team. But the reality is that these require very different content, very different strategies to make sure that your success. Content is definitely the vehicle, but you really need to plan out the vision and the strategy and the go-to-market that you need to be able to then start to look at the content strategy that you're going to build. And whether, building an audience is about, looking at getting loyal subscribers, which is fine, but really we're looking a little bit more granular here to see, is it about driving prospect engagement? Is it about driving internally, knowledge for the organisation, such as the sales team, the marketing and product teams? So what we would suggest is for every content strategy that's developed, there's a clear vision and strategy around why you're producing this content. And then when you're looking to create and document the strategy, this is very clear that this content has a purpose of building an SEO, so it's about generating organic traffic. So that has a particular purpose, which is a different purpose to building, and enabling the sales team, which is a different type of content. So when we refer to looking at positioning a strategy, it's really about making sure that you're clear on the vision, the purpose of that content, down from an overall objective, but down to an individual activity point of view. Obviously, we know that you need to measure things, everybody does, but most people are not clear on what success looks like, and anybody who's not measuring ROI now, I'm sure will be in 5 years' time, because of the pressure to be able to optimize, improve, and use this tool as a competitive advantage. So to be able to measure your purpose, and so when we're talking about creating the vision for what you want to achieve, say that demand generation through inbound marketing, you'll be able to measure and put in the leading indicators to make sure that the business understands that it's delivering a total cost per lead. The business also understands there's some leading indicators around that, such as blogs, subscribers, traffic, but there's also some engagement metrics to make sure that those core measures or leading measures are actually achieved. And so measuring the purpose of the strategy is absolutely critical. But without a process of delivering that content is one of the biggest failings, and the documentation that required to make it successful is critical for success. And we see many organizations who've got a strategy in place. They've got, we need to measure it in this way. But what they fail to have is a methodology of delivering content. And so what you can see here is an example of a methodology which there are key pieces of documents that are summarizing, such as the research, making sure that there's persona competitive performance insight in there. There's creative review, there's industry research, there's a messaging framework. All of this research needs to inform how you then produce the content strategy. And that content strategy really then is about what assets or what objectives are you creating. So this sort of method, as we go through, being able to target, create the content, make sure that it goes through the right channels, make sure it's nurturing the audience, and then you're looking to track the performance across that, really would be one of the foundation elements and one of the things that we find many organizations are missing, where they're just producing a lot of this content without the methodology behind it.
Yeah, first, I think this slide is brilliant in its simplicity, because sometimes it's hard for people to kind of get their arms around the various components that they need to be thinking about, and that whole tracking and monitoring and ROI and kind of getting to that point where what you are finding out is not just helping you make decisions, it's actually helping you determine the overall value. So the slide you had before, sort of the pyramid, I thought was also brilliant, because at the end of the day, the C-suite wants to know where the conversions are, but all of that stuff at the bottom, I always, I like to say things like engagement and page views and all of that's critical for helping decide what's working, but it's not necessarily critical for getting the C-suite on the bandwagon, right? So I love this chart so much in how, I think it would be something everybody should have in their hands when they're sitting down and documenting their strategy.
And I think when you're looking at it, the key thing with this is if you look at the blue points, these are actually the input that people sign off on, and that builds accountability. But it also allows the wider stakeholders, the influencers, the customers to actually say, this is our research that can you feedback on it? Can you give us some visibility of what your thoughts are? So you know that there's accountability, but also buy-in from everybody else in the organization. And then when you're starting to create the content, the sign off of the content planning document provides you with a whole user experience of what we're trying to deliver. But it also details this piece of content is going to be delivered for the blog, which is going to drive a keyword visibility, or this piece of content is going to be driven for paid media, and it's going to be promoted across these channels. But the key thing is it gives everybody a point of where they understand what they need to do to make that content live, which is probably one of the biggest pitfalls we see with many organizations, where perhaps when they're getting into, they've got a great strategy, but the execution, the ability to then brief content to individuals becomes a real challenge. So having clear writer's briefs, so how does the editor or the internal stakeholder push out this production and this what we want to articulate into a real asset? So we would say the big opportunity for many organizations is making sure the briefing element, and we see some terrible briefs like down on one line, but we also see some very comprehensive briefs, which means this piece is going to have a title, it's going to be this amount of words, but it's also going to be presented with video. But it's got a purpose of driving leads, and this is the number of leads we would expect of that particular asset. So it's down to a very detailed, granular planning level, but we also know what channel it's going to go through. And one of the biggest challenges we see is many people create content, but they don't write for the channel. They just write for what they feel, and typically the owned media rather than the paid media. And so it's about balancing off and making sure that the way you deliver this approach is building accountability, but it's also making sure that you have a very set of sign-off documentation to support you. Things like the performance metrics, the marketing and sales SLA, but again the promotional plan. Good example of that, an organisation who went through this strategy was a company called Tech Data, who actually went from selling all of their, so they're a major distributor, selling all of their wares to resellers and selling them directly by telephone or sending out promotional emails. Where we worked with them back in December 2016 is basically launching a community, which is basically doing a lot of the legwork, the sales and marketing team, which is about building a community. It was about building an audience where people can go and engage to understand and learn about the products or services without always trying to push promotional products at them. So the aim was to build a community, it was to build an audience, it was to build some loyal subscribers that they can then opt into at any point in time, but was an ability to be able to educate the audience, and for a distributor to make this type of approach or types was very innovative in the market, because really what they're trying to do is automate the sales process through the use of a community. And this wasn't about slamming them with lots of offers within the community, it's about driving that audience to understand what could they achieve with certain technologies, and then going to an e-commerce store or directly speaking to creating more of an inbound approach to lead generation. And this has become one of their main strategic tools across the globe when it started off in the UK. If we're looking at sort of one of the other key goals for commitment, one of the biggest things we get feedback on all the time is, yeah, great, but we just need to be different. And what does different actually mean? And differentiation is very, very challenging in all markets. And we know, it's not an age-old problem. It's always been, the marketer's number one thing. I need to differentiate. I need to be able to present this brand in a different way. But because there's so much noise happening out there and many people are doing this practice, it's really how do you step out of above the parapet and actually do something truly different, which may be telling a totally unique story. But again, that's a challenge for many organizations. So we would say, if you're looking at differentiation, go back to perhaps thinking about the coffee market for a moment, where many organizations, everybody, the big brands are selling coffee, everybody's got their favorite place where they buy a coffee. But what, the big brands have been able to do is identify where they feel they can build more of an experience. So not only do they sell coffee, they sell free Wi-Fi, they sell, a nice place to work, they sell food. And what they've done is built an experience around their core proposition. And this is what we would encourage many organizations to think about. When you're looking at driving experience or differentiation, you can use customer experience as a real big lever around it. So how you can then relate that into your physical proposition. So many people say, that's great, but that's a coffee market. What we would say then is, well, why don't you just think about what you can do? And then what many of our customers did or would do previously without the guidance and direction would actually go off and start coming up with some crazy idea that they think is really different. And then we'd have to rein them back. Because I appreciate everybody wants to be different. Everybody wants to talk about, the way that they're great and the unique widget that they've got. But the reality is many people don't buy products, they buy into the brand. So if you look at when you're delivering differentiation, you need to make sure that it ties back to your core story. And this is the tree that one of my customers drew to explain the concept as we were explaining to him in one of the workshops that we did. And really it was about how you can build a core story which is anchored in your sort of brand, your behaviors, but then how you can then start to innovate and drive different stories, internal and external, but still relating it back to the core story. And that core story is really your existence and why you are different. So it's the big why story coming out. And this is where, when we're looking at differentiation, it's important to, come up, look at experience as an opportunity, look at how you can, be innovative, but really you've got to make sure it does center back to what you offer and relate that. And I don't know, Stephanie, you maybe have a couple of examples that you could share.
Yeah, I love the tree, by the way. That's pretty awesome. And it kind of gets back to our discussion to going all the way back to developing personas, right? And not trying to be all things to all people. You have to sort of differentiate where you want that content to go. And so a B2C example that I love is from an insurance company, a really old insurance company actually called HBF in Australia. When they were planning content marketing strategy, they decided they wanted to focus on parents, right? They're an insurance company, so parents is a good target market, but that's a broad market. So they decided to steer clear of the crowded maternity market and created strategy around new or expectant dads. And it's really a brilliant program. It's called Direct Advice for Dads. If there are any dads listening, you might want to check it out. It's by dads, it's for dads. They sort of found this underserved gap and started creating some really compelling, real life, and even in some cases quite edgy content to appeal to this segment. So instead of trying to create content for the masses, they use their differentiation techniques to hone in on a very critical market. They don't sell anything in this. There's no, hey, buy our life insurance. There's none of that. Ultimately, they would hope that this market would turn to them when they decide they need life insurance. But the approach they're taking is very non-salesy, which is what we believe content marketing should be. And it's really quite brilliant. And when I think of the B2B market, there's a company called Frontline Education. They're a big software company. And Their mission statement is that they want their content to reflect, their mission statement, which is to inform, educate, and inspire educational leaders. And in the content they're creating, again, it's not selling, it's to a very specific market. They've got that mission statement, they stick to it, and their numbers are so impressive. So the mission statement too kind of comes into the whole documentation. It's a key part. You got to create it, you got to believe it, you've got to live it.
Absolutely. No, and they get some really good examples. I think to bring that again into the forefront for maybe an example, we're working with a company called T3, who are a learning and development company who service a lot of the large FTSE companies. They were struggling with the sort of content marketing because everybody produces HR content. How to be a better me. You go to LinkedIn or wherever. There's just the whole internet is spread with content that's self-fulfilling. But where this company decided that they thought they had an angle, where they started to build a community, which ended up being called the Source of All Knowledge, SOAK, which is really around what they could offer is not about training HR or learning and development professionals or CEOs how to deliver these methodologies. It was really about what language could they use to be able to communicate the ideas that they have, and how can they use language in a way that they can connect to their particular target customers, but also how their customers can then use that language to connect to their specific employees. So the way that this company approached it was looking at identifying, 7 or 8 core business pains, which is around about, driving creativity, the end of year review, how to paint a team vision as well as a corporate vision. But there were certain pain points that the HR learning development manager was having, and really they honed in on those pain points and created a series of almost Mr. Men book feel type of offers, again collaborating with their customers. So there were almost best practices of how the customers being able to achieve success. And really what this enabled them to do is build a community in a very short space of time of about 2,500 professionals over a 12-month, which they've then been able to monetize and be able to generate nearly an 8 times return on investment based on the fact that they weren't ringing people up and asking them how to engage with them. They were asking, whether they could actually send through the books so they could print them off, so they could share them with their colleagues. And that was really a community that they've built and continue to nurture, which is basically providing them with this sort of language of leadership, the numbers and the language you can use within your working day to day. So it's another good example of how you can really start to drive that type of level of differentiation, sticking to your core theme, but really trying to step out visually and obviously from a tone or a message point of view. I think the final goal, and just to wrap up, the commitment really is about, we get asked time and time again, how do I engage my customers? How do I do case studies? Can I have a case study? It's so difficult to even get case studies out. And this is the general conversation we have with many people. So the question I ask is, what are you doing for them in return? And many organisations struggle with it. So if you really feel, like us, that a lot of quality content comes from the insight, the knowledge that your customers hold, and the way that they should help you make your content marketing practice easy, you should really start on putting a framework, some way of enabling your customers to see, if I do this for you, you'll do this for me. A bit of a quid pro quo. So one of the main commitments we would encourage everybody to do is focus on how to improve the quality of your content, focus on doing it with your customers, and really start to build some form of advocacy framework around it. So this means if they produce some commentary on a white paper, you'll do something in return for them, whether it's delivering with a bit of swag, whether it's giving them some vouchers, whether it's donating to their favourite charity. But really what you want to be able to do is lay out all of the acts of content collaboration that you can do, whether that's webinars, reviews, white papers, writing blogs, and actually come up with a framework which they can see, well, if I do this for you, this is what I can get in return. And so basically building out a hierarchy where if they do certain things, there could be physical rewards, recognition, either giving them fame and fortune on your blog, giving them VIP experiences, but whatever that requirement is structuring it in a way which, if they start at a basic level, they can work very much just towards becoming maybe sitting on your customer advisory board. So it's about looking at enriching your content with customers, but putting a framework. And to do that, you need to drive more of a formal advocacy program, which will help you then seed the content and really improve performance. And probably one of the best examples of that is where Cisco already had a reasonable following but had no structure around it. They implemented what they call the gateway, which is a portal where it's really where customers can go and share stories, but really find out how they can access knowledge from other customers. So a lot of user-generated content. And by formalizing the structure, putting a reward system in behind it, they were able to get to some of these numbers where, they identified very quickly 152 new case studies where the customers were coming to them rather than them asking their customers. And for me, that role reversal of wanting to be an advocate and contribute to content strategy is probably one of the gold things that everybody wants, but really many people struggle to achieve.
This is just brilliant with Cisco. I've got to tell you, I don't know that I've ever had such affinity with a brand that I was willing to tattoo myself, but let me tell you though, we did have someone submit for a speaking role at Content Marketing World, and in his submission he said, if I get to speak, I will tattoo the CMI logo on my arm. So this time next year when we're talking, I may have an interesting photo to show you. So, but I love this idea of inviting your community to contribute, to celebrate them in numerous ways. We've got a great editorial team here at CMI, but most of the time we are asking the community to contribute blogs for us. We want that perspective and expertise from the community as well, and we reward them in return. So, maybe we'll have tattoos next year. We'll see.
But absolutely, and I think one of these things is many people are, have the notion, but they don't have the community, but they want to be able to, make it easy. So if they knew like 10 customers who are actually going to produce, a blog for them, it's going to ease the load on terms of what they need to do themselves, maybe a small editing job. At the same time, they're going to get this raft of content and different opinions and perspectives. Obviously, we need governance and guidelines around it to make sure we're getting what we need. But I think the formality of some form of advocacy scheme is one of the major opportunities, a lot in B2B as well, that we're starting to see. So that really brings us to the conclusion of the webinar. And I think I appreciate Stephanie for sharing some of your thoughts. It's been very insightful just going through that report again and identifying everybody's still on that journey. There's still a long way to go, but I think from some of the key takeaways for me, it's being a little bit patient around how people can achieve success. Really, if they are going to do that, they need to put in, that documented strategy, that sort of methodology of building content. But whatever you do, don't forget that creativity and that ability to drive, brave and experimental content. But most importantly, it's got to be geared around that loyal subscriber and making sure that is really your route to revenue. I don't know, Stephanie, you had any key takeaways from what we've gone through today?
Yeah, those are perfect. And, I know that content marketing is not always easy, but it's worth it, I think. And for anybody who is struggling or just needs some validation, this report is a great one to read. We've got plenty of other resources too to help you do something or to help you do something better. Don't ever hesitate to reach out. We're always here. That's our mission, right? To educate and to grow content marketing as a discipline. And I appreciate the time spent with you today, Alistair.
Great. Well, thanks again. And just to conclude, there's a content audit that we offer everybody, which we can then send out with the slides and the webinar recording, so you can benchmark yourselves. And it's a little report that will be customized to your current state, which we can offer as well. Much appreciated, Stephanie, and thanks everybody for joining, and enjoy the rest of your days.